I was 11 years old. At the time, I was living in an apartment situated on a street with ongoing construction. Needless to say, they often tapped into the electric supply, and the power fluctuated quite a bit. Therefore, the streetlights often served no real purpose, especially in the winters when evening dawned on us with pitch-black darkness. That is relevant, so keep it in mind. From what I remember, it was a weekend I was supposed to spend at a friend's house. For an 11-year-old me, this was an exciting prospect, having been loaded with schoolwork the entire week. I was to spend what I believed to be Friday night sleeping over, and spend the entirety of Saturday at her bungalow, to return home that very evening. What made it even better was the fact that her parents had an event they couldn't avoid, and therefore trusted us to stay alone in their 2-floor house for the entirety of the 6 hours they were gone. Back then, the idea of spending a whole night alone with my friend was great. No interference, and a whole 6 hours of games and movies on their huge TV. As it turns out, my friend had other ideas. I arrived at her house just short of 8 p.m. It was already pretty dark out, and her parents had waited for me to arrive before telling us about emergency contacts, dinner, and all that. They also reminded us to get their 4-year-old Labrador inside as the weather was acting up, and his kennel had a few loose panels which leaked when it rained. This is also an important fact to be noted. After they left, we watched a few cartoons, had dinner, and were chilling in our living room playing cards. That's when my friend Sid had the ingenious idea of exploring a fenced plot of land a few hundred meters down the street that she resided on. There was no construction happening in there, so what little of that area didn't have shambles was overgrown with plants and weeds. We got the dog inside, leashed it to its long chain that allowed it to roam within reason, got the keys, and left the house to make the short 10-minute trip. At this point, it was about 10 p.m. In retrospect, this is where we still had a chance to avoid this particular encounter, but being the curious and daring 11-year-olds we were, we ventured anyways. Rather uneventfully, we arrived, and set to climbing over the 2-meter wall. Luckily for us, the wall was broken enough in places to make good holds to carry us over. Once inside, Sid suggested that we sit a few meters away from each other for as long as we could, until one of us was too scared to do so. We faced each other and walked backwards, till there was just enough light to see the general silhouette of the other. After what seemed to me like a good 10 minutes, I saw Sid's hunched form rise up and start to walk towards me. She seemed to be walking rather fast and in a haphazard manner, jumping over rocks and such at a daring pace, even getting cut by thorns in the process. She came up to me, and just as I was about to laugh and call her out on being scared, she told me to get up because she needed to go feed Shaggy. I remember being really confused, because her parents had already filled his bowl with food, and he had this water thing which he could operate in case he was thirsty. But I saw her face, and let me just say I've never seen her look this pale. It looked like she had seen a ghost. So without asking questions, I said okay, and we made our way back over the wall, albeit in a tense manner and rather quickly. The moment my feet touched the ground, I felt Sid grab my arm and start sprinting down the street. To put things into perspective, I had a bruise from how hard she grasped it for 2 weeks straight. So we ran like hell was chasing us, arrived at her house, and went in through her front yard fence gate, a towering metal gate without bars, and she told me to unlock the front door while she deadbolted the metal gate's various locks into the ground. At this point, I was starting to panic, but we got into the house, and then Sid proceeded to run around the house locking and closing all windows and doors, as well as pulling the curtain shut tight. I was very confused as to why she was doing this, and so was her dog, who stood there and followed her around while she did so. After about 10 minutes, she came back into the ground floor living room, and with a very scared expression, she explained to me that the reason she did all that was because while we were sitting apart, She happened to glance away from a few meters to my right to see another human silhouette crouching in the bushes. She thought she was imagining it until it moved closer to where I was sitting and seemed to be unaware that my friend could see them. She didn't want to startle me or the person, and so she made up having to feed the dog as an excuse to get out of there without alerting the person still crouching. After hearing this, I was quite shaken, and we hugged for a few minutes, deciding not to tell our parents, as they had very much warned us not to go out of our compound. We didn't want this to be the last of our time alone together having fun, so we peeked out the window and into the street, which seemed to be empty, as far as we could see. We proceeded to put it behind us as excitement took over our minds once again. I would have loved to say that was the end of it, but what happens next has stuck with me to date, and I hold a fear of that situation from that point onward. To give you an idea of the layout of her compound, her house was surrounded on two sides by a lawn, and the lawn was then surrounded by a wall some 2.5 meters high. The wall had one entrance, which were the tall metal gates I had talked about previously. The house itself had windows all around the perimeter, as well as two potential entrances, the first being the front door, while the second being a door to this small attached space next to the house, which was made of see-through metal, like the kind which some metal fences are made of, but a bit stronger. The space had a metal door with a lock only accessible from the inside, as well as a door which was on the wall this space was attached to inside. However, the door only had a deadbolt on, and it was made of light wood. So an hour or so in after the incident, we were upstairs in her air-conditioned room, playing games on her computer, and talking about whatever it is 11-year-olds talk about, when we heard the dog bark downstairs. It was growling, and seemed to bark at random intervals. Keep in mind that her dog was a friendly Labrador, who rarely ever growled or barked aggressively. My friend went to get the dog upstairs to her room, and after she returned, she informed me that the dog was standing next to the front door growling at it, and that it took her quite a bit of effort to get him upstairs, as he kept trying to return to the door. We were really confused, as this was unusual for him to do, and thinking that a stray dog might have caught his attention, we decided to go into the balcony attached to her room. It gave us a view into the front lawn and a part of the street directly in front of the house. Instead of seeing what we assumed would be a stray dog or cat, we looked down to see a man standing very still in her lawn, right in front of her front door. In the limited light, we could make out heavy layers of muddy clothing and a full head of hair that looked very matted. The dog was with us in the balcony and was whining to be let outside. We crouched down there, and right as we were about to discuss what we should do, we heard what sounded like the front door rattling, as if someone was trying to open with the handle. We creeped back downstairs, only to realize that this person had now moved on to the window next to the door and was trying to open that. The realization hit that he was trying to find an entrance into the house by going around the perimeter. Just as we were about to creep back upstairs, my friend grabbed me again, and in a hushed tone told me she had forgotten to lock the attached space door in her hurry before. We both looked at each other and paled, as we realized it would gain the intruder easy access into the house. The inner door had nothing but a deadbolt. At this point, we heard the windows rattling behind the house, nearly 3/4 of the way back to the front again. The attached side door was a few meters away from the front door, and we were lucky that he had chosen to go around to the other side. She told me to wait by the inner door with the dog, while she went outside and bolted the metal door. She then informed me to close the door as soon as she returned, and that if she was caught, to let the dog outside and to close the inner door as discreetly as possible, to not give myself away. We were both terrified, and since we had no time to argue about it, I stood guard at the inner door while she went to the outer, fumbled with the lock, and returned inside practically running as quietly as she could. We closed the inner door, and just then we heard the outer door start to rattle harshly. Had she not gone there and then, there was a big chance we would have had no choice but to hide in her house as he found his way in. After that, he tried opening all the doors and windows, which took a while as he was doing it quite intently and forcefully. We found our way back upstairs and went into her balcony to see if he had finally gone away. We stood near the foot of her stairs for a while, listening for any further activity. As we looked down, we saw him once again standing in her front lawn. However, we could see his head was tilted back, and it felt like he was looking right at us. We knew that it was too dark for him to be able to spot us, as along with closing all the windows and such, we had proceeded to kill the lights in her room, as well as draw the curtains so her little bedside lamp wouldn't escape the blinds. He then started giggling in the quiet of the night, and proceeded to go down on all fours, crawling around the lawn in front of the house while his laughter grew. In retrospect, we should have called the authorities at this point, but being terrified 11-year-olds, we didn't want to get into trouble for not even being able to follow simple instructions. The man did this for nearly half an hour, only to stand up once again facing the street, climb on top of the kennel in the corner, up to the top of the wall, and jump down. We stood still in her balcony waiting to see if he would return, but an hour or so passed where he didn't. That was the last time we saw him the entirety of the night, till at around 2 a.m. her parents returned. The next morning they were very confused as to why all the doors and windows were closed on such a pleasant night, and why there was mud on the front doorknob. We said we just wanted to play in the dark inside the house, lying about the actuality of the situation, and to this day I do not think the man has been caught. This happened around 2004, when I was in my mid-20s, and my sister, the unfortunate main character in this story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiancé and I. On weekends, we went out to one of two bars that had karaoke, air hockey, and the like. This particular night, we were at the bar further out from where we lived in the city, a good half an hour by car. Everyone was having drinks, socializing with people we knew. It was one of those places with lots of regulars. Singing karaoke. Nothing out of the ordinary, really, except that night, my sister started hanging out with these two older ladies who had a liquor store in their purses, and were quite sharing, although I didn't know it at the time. As she tended to drink a lot more than me, that was a score for her, less money spent on drinks, but she ended up far more hammered than usual. Towards the end of the night, around 1:45, she was really very drunk. The aforementioned fiancé, my sister's BF, and I were in a heated air hockey game, planning to leave as soon as it was over. She walked up to us and said she was going to smoke a cigarette outside. Nothing unusual, everybody did. Until we were done. About 5 minutes later we paid our tab and walked out, but she was not on the porch area where smokers congregated. Okay, weird, but not too alarming. We went out back of the bar to check for her, inside, in the restroom, in the large parking lot. It's notable that this particular bar was in a business park, so there were multiple businesses that were closed, as well as the Mexican restaurant next door that had just closed as well. We searched, asked everyone that knew us, and those who didn't if they had seen her, but nobody had. I asked the workers from the restaurant that were sitting outside as well. They seemed nervous when telling me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't think on that much till later. By then, I was in full-on panic after trying to call her cell about 15 times only to have it go to voicemail. Being a bit inebriated myself, I started searching for her. I went as far as to take off my heels and start running down the highway searching, as honestly, there had been times she would start walking home in the past, though never from this place, as it was very far away from where we lived. The fiancé and her boyfriend thought we should go to the house to see if she got someone to bring her home. It seemed unlikely, but not unheard of. We get home, and she's still nowhere to be found. Just as we were about to head back and I was going to phone the police, I received a call from the police department on my phone. They indicated that they had my sister, and that there had been an incident, and I needed to get down there. We rushed to the police department, where we were taken into a room with my sister. Her face was red from obvious crying, and bruises were starting to show on her arms and chest. She said that when she told us she was going outside, she thought we said we were leaving then, so she walked to the car. After a few minutes, being drunk and tired, she sat down against it to wait. A van pulled up, and a young man started asking her directions to somewhere. She walked closer to try and explain, when suddenly the back door flew open, and 2 other men grabbed her and threw her in, taking off. They were rough with her, hitting her a few times while holding her down, saying that they only wanted money. They snatched her purse from her, breaking the straps, and searched it, quite haphazardly as they didn't find the $30 she had in it. After driving around a bit speaking in Spanish she couldn't understand, they pulled out a gun, making sure she saw it, and put a bandana around her eyes, telling her they'd let her go. She was driven to some woods by a neighborhood she did not know. The door was opened, and they pushed her out, telling her to run, that if she took the blindfold off or turned around, they'd shoot her. She ran and ran. Eventually she did take the blindfold off and came to the first door she saw, beating on it and screaming for help. The police were called. She was picked up, and now we're back to my being there, hearing what I feared had happened. A report was filed. The police did a search and did locate the bandana she ripped off, but she was so intoxicated and terrified, she wasn't able to give a clear description of the van other than a white older model, or the 3 occupants other than young Mexican men. The investigation turned up nothing, as no cameras caught any of this. Hell, we even had detectives in our home who said, "Look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and didn't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges on you." Aside from the bruises, broken purse, and her trauma, there was nothing concrete to go on. That was unpleasant. I'm still fairly convinced someone at the restaurant knew something, given their suspicious behaviors when I asked about her, but the police were never able to find that link. All said and done, the guys were never found. Eventually, we just moved on, in different states. It's now just a story in our lives. It just makes me sick thinking what could have happened, but thankfully, it didn't. This is to recount some unsettling events I went through during my college years, as well as the most amazing example of the bro sixth sense I've ever witnessed. So, without further ado, meet Kevin. Kevin was a colleague of mine and was in the same group as me, which meant we had maybe 5 or 6 subjects per year together. Kevin was a bit odd. Not that there was something wrong with him physically. He was adorable. A bit nerdy, a bit on the shorter, scrawny side, with some blonde hair, big blue eyes, and like 3 fluffy hairs on his chin instead of facial hair. If I had to compare him to something, I'd say he looked like a cute, soft baby chicken, if baby chickens were mentally inclined to grow into serial killers. More on that later. At first, I didn't really notice him. There were a lot of people in my class. Everything was new, and I personally didn't know anyone, except for a guy named Harper, whom I knew from my sports days. We'd often compete against each other, exchanged colorful insults on the track, and then go get drinks together. As I've said, I only knew Harper, and there were only 6 other girls in my class, as I've attended classes that held little interest among the female college population. During that time, I made friends and got really chummy with 3 more geeky guys. Zachary, who I even casually dated for a short time. Steve, we realized our mothers went to college together too. Instant friendship. And Rick, with whom I shared many interests. So, to count it down, the important people so far are Harper, Zachary, Steve, and Rick. These people are important because they would later become my personal army. And then there was Kevin. Damn cute Kevin, who I made the mistake of asking if he had any notes picked up from the first half of a lecture I missed because I overslept. In Kevin speak, "Hey, got the notes from this morning?" apparently translated into, "I have an interest in you, oh magnificent Kevin. Nothing would make me happier than knowing I've caught your eye." I borrowed his notes, partially copied them, and returned his notebook back. What I didn't see was that Kevin then sniffed the notebook when I had my back turned. Zachary noticed it first, and snort laughed about it later, because my first reaction to it when he told me was to sniff myself and see if I stank or something. I was young and naive then, so the sniffing came off less as what's wrong with him and more as what's wrong with me. And that's where it all went downhill. Over the next few weeks, Kevin would always be there. Never talking to anyone precisely, just kind of staring me down when we were in class, when we had breaks, and when we went to the coffee shop outside. Then he started showing up for classes we didn't attend together, and he simply arrived too early for his later classes. He never participated, he just sat there in the back of the room. Kevin also had sort of an aura about him. Like you didn't have to look at the door to know when he entered the room. You just felt his eyes on the back of your head and kind of wished for a shower. Anyway, I didn't worry too much, until one day I went to the women's bathroom during a break. I did my business, went to the front section to wash my hands. In came Kevin. I was alone. Kevin turned and closed the door behind him and locked them shut. Needless to say, I was confused and unsure of what to do, so I just stared at him and asked him if he needed something. "Hi," he said, then proceeded with, "How are you?" Like he hadn't just locked himself in the woman's bathroom with me for no fathomable reason. I realized quickly that something was very, very wrong with the situation, and attempted not to panic, managing to keep up a nonchalant expression and turn towards the mirror so I could still see him. I pretended to fix my makeup. "Fine," I said, and spoke no more. I could see Kevin fidgeting, playing with the key nervously, and after a long and uncomfortable silence, I heard a loud banging from the other side of the door. It was Harper and Steve, Harper yelling something like, "Kevin, get your scrawny ass over here and open that door, or I swear to God, that door ain't gonna be the only thing I'm breaking." I could hear Steve behind him, sounding a bit panicked and yelling at him to move, since he had managed to get the spare key. Kevin paled and stepped away, the key he had falling somewhere to the floor. Steve and Harper unlocked the door, and Harper jumped on Kevin like a damn primate and knocked him to the floor, while Steve and Rick, who was there as well, got inside and all but dragged me out of the bathroom area. None of them wanted to tell me what, or why, or even how any of that had happened, but I pushed at the weakest link, Rick, when we were alone. I found out that a whole hour prior to all of that, Rick overheard Kevin asking one of the on-campus students, the guys who get some extra cash if they help with paperwork, fixing, and cleaning the campus, for the ladies' bathroom key and paying him for it. Rick didn't know why the hell Kevin would need that key, but he knew Kevin was a weirdo, so he figured it couldn't be good. Later on, Steve was looking for me, and asked Rick if he had seen me, and things kind of clicked fast for Rick. They asked around, and people told them they saw me go into the bathroom area and that I hadn't come out yet. More confirmed that they saw Kevin going there too, and joked that we must have had a makeout session or something. Steve immediately connected the dots. Harper overheard him talking to Rick, and they all went to break me free from Kevin's affections. Kevin appeared with a slightly black eye in class 2 days later, and just wishing to forget the whole thing, I decided to pretend he did not exist. I wish this was the end of it. Maybe a week or two went by. I figured he'd learned his lesson. He was leaving me alone. But then he got the wind in his sails back for some reason, and proceeded with attempting to sit next to me in class. He was so insistent that Zachary got involved, and now the guys made a timetable, so 2 and 2 would attend all classes at times when I was there, so each could sit on either side of me. I never asked this of them, they just insisted. After a few failed attempts, Kevin gave up and settled for sitting in the back, glaring at my back and the 2 guys on duty that day. I wish this was the end of it. 2 weeks of that later, Kevin either didn't show up for class at all or left early. I hoped he'd found some other interests and that it was finally over. Hell no. I noticed now Kevin was following me to the bus station. It took just one time to see him standing inconspicuously behind the newspaper stand to freak out and call Steve, as he lived nearby. Steve picked me up and drove me home. The next morning, Harper called me at around 9 a.m. and went, "Are you in my class at 10 today?" Yeah. "Pack your shit and wait for me at the end of your street. Kevin is waiting for you at the bus station." This went on for some 5 days, as the guys extended their bro services to now accompanying me literally at all times, before, during, and after class. That day, Kevin showed up to class looking roughed up, but now stared at me with so much hate I could barely cope, and finally, after some sound advice from Harper and Rick, decided to bring this shit to college authorities. The pro dean immediately transferred Kevin to a completely different group, so our classes never overlapped again. I stopped seeing Kevin all the time, and reached my final year in college. By now, Zachary and Steve had moved away. Harper had finished early and no longer attended classes, so it was only me and Rick now. But it was okay, since Kevin was no longer there. I wish this was the end of it. Rick and I finished college, graduated, and decided to celebrate by visiting a medieval fair in Rick's hometown that summer. We agreed to get some drinks for old time's sake. All was well. We had a great time as we toured the fair a bit, and suddenly, Rick, the sweet, polite Rick, says, "Son of a bitch, isn't that Kevin?" It was. Kevin was there, staring at us, before turning on his heels and leaving. We saw him a few more times. I started to panic, thinking he was following me again, so Rick was already dialing a few of his friends to come over. But suddenly, Kevin got lost, and I never, ever saw him again. So I, 19 and female, was at a house party a couple of days ago. I only really knew a few people there, and it was pretty packed. I hung around with my 2 friends there for a while, having some drinks. After a while, my friends went into this room that everyone was hotboxing in. I didn't go because I didn't really feel like drinking and being stoned at a party where I barely knew anyone. So I just mingled for a bit, then went on my phone talking to my other friends. I noticed this guy that keeps staring me up and down, and instantly felt my stomach sink. I'm no stranger to people trying to catch my eye to strike a conversation or flirt, but I instantly had a bad feeling about this guy. I looked back down at my phone and sent my location to my friends, just letting them know where I was because things were changing from feeling chill to suddenly sketchy. There were a bunch of cans of soda in the kitchen, so I got up to go grab a Sprite instead of having any more drinks. I brought my own alcohol. I'll never take drinks from strangers. As I'm there, the same guy that kept looking at me comes in and starts trying to get me to take this drink in a red solo cup. I told him no. He kept trying, though, and I was getting annoyed because he kept being super pushy. I started to be pretty blunt. "Look, I don't want your drink or your company," and walked away. I thought that'd be the end of it, and pushed it to the back of my mind as one of my friends came out from the hotbox room, stoned and pretty happy. We hung out some more, and my friend wanted a cigarette, so I went out on the balcony with her. As we're there, she put her cigarettes on the ledge, and as she's talking animatedly, her arm pushed her cigarettes off and they fell down into the yard. I was gonna go downstairs and outside with her to go get them, but she told me she had to grab something from her car anyways, and that she'd be right back. I decided to just wait down there for her. I'm on my phone when I hear the door open. I expected it to be her. As I'm about to say, that was quick. I spin around, and I'm face to face with that guy from earlier. He just grabs my face and kisses me. I pushed at his chest and said, "What the fuck, dude? Did you not hear what I said?" He proceeded to say something in Spanish, which I can't speak, but I could pick up a few words he was saying, like puta. I had a friend who was an exchange student, and she taught me all the naughty words. I told him to fuck off, and went to push past him to go back outside. He proceeded to push me up against the wall outside and try to kiss on my neck. That's when I pushed him away as hard as I could, but he then let go of my wrists and grabbed my throat, hard, while maintaining eye contact and smirking the whole time. Just when he used his other hand and tried to grab my ass, my friend came back from getting her cigarettes, poked her head out, and saw what was happening. She tried to intervene, but he pushed her away with his other hand. I heard her say, "What the fuck? Hell no." She grabbed the closest guy to the door from inside and brought him out. The random heroic guy from inside then grabbed the crazy throat grabber, putting him in some type of chokehold, and started screaming at him. He got kicked out. I'm pretty sure someone punched him right in the face, too. Everyone was super apologetic, and said they didn't even know that guy and weren't sure who he even was or how he got there. I wasn't about to call the cops or anything, because I didn't want the party to get busted, but I went to the bathroom and immediately broke down crying. I called my friends. My friends here weren't sober enough to drive, and they came to get me. I have a couple of finger bruises on my neck still, and I hate to think of what would have happened if my friend had been distracted by something and not came inside when she did. At least I know my intuition works great. But let me just say, I'm never going to a party where I barely know anyone anymore. That was scary as hell.